May I have your attention, please? Shabbat Shalom, everyone. My name is son of Yisrayl Abel and Hawkins, and I'd like to serve you forever as a priest starting very soon. It's now time to start finding your seats for Sabbath services.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom.
My name is son of Yisrayl Abel, Buffalo, Bill Hawkins, and I'd like to serve you as a priest starting very soon. It's a privilege and honor to present to you the sons and daughters of Yisrayl Abel now entering the sanctuary. I now present one of the sons of Yisrayl Abel, Odahyah Hawkins. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. You may be seated. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. Today my title is, Who is Yahshua? First, I would like to show you what Yahshua's name means. Please turn to Mattithyah 1 and verse 21. And it says, "And she will give birth to a son, and will call his name Yahshua. Yahweh is salvation, for Yahweh will save his people from their sins." Yahshua lived a sinless life. That means he did not sin. Yahshua said he must be about his Father's business. Please turn to Luke 2 and verse 49 on page 783. And it says, "He said to them, 'Why is it that you search for me? Do you not know that I must be about my Father's business?'" And we must also be about our Father's business. So we should follow the example that Yahshua has set for us. We must take a time out in the day to study in the Book of Yahweh in the House of Yahweh literature. Let's take our minds off of war games and put away the Pokemons. Yeshua Messiah did not retaliate. Whenever the Roman army came and with swords and spears and beated him, he did not retaliate. Same thing with Yahshua Messiah. Whenever they arrested him and the police came armed with guns, he did not retaliate. Please turn to Isaiah 53. In verse 7, and it says, "He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He was led as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before his shearer, so he opened not his mouth." If Yahshua Messiah would have retaliated, he would not be our high priest over the house of Yahweh. So let's follow a perfect example that Yahshua set for us. So, who is Yahshua? Yahshua is our brother, our high priest over the house of Yahweh, and our atonement sacrifice for our sins. And with that, if you all please stand.
If you would all remain standing, it's my great honor and privilege to present to you a great son of Yisrayl Abel, Deacon White Buffalo Hawkins.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. You may be seated. Today I would like to talk about how Yahweh's creation, how animals help us. Have you ever considered how animals help us? First, let's start with the basics. Animals such as cattle and goats make milk, whey, cheese, yogurt, butter, cream, and they give us meat, which we can get right here at Yahweh's house. Animals such as deer, elk, moose, caribou, and reindeer can also provide us with meat. Predators such as foxes, hawks, and snakes can help by keeping down the population of crop eaters such as rabbits and mice, but could also be controlled. Also, predators like lions and bears help balance the ecosystem. They single out animals that are weak and sick. Doing this, they keep the flocks healthy. Also, dogs have been trained to guard people and property, to help hunt and assist the blind and elderly, and herd cattle and sheep. There are programs with horses and dolphins to help children born with disabilities to become functional. Studies show that also having a pet helps lower blood pressure and lifts a person's mood. Animals also clean up the earth, such as pigs, vultures, lobsters, catfish, and shrimp are some of the animals that scavenge and clean up the earth. And in Leviticus 11, it talks about these animals. Let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 14. Deuteronomy chapter 14. And let's start at verse 6. It says, "You may eat every animal that has a split hoof completely divided, and it also chews the cud. However, of those that chew the cud, or of those that have a split hoof completely divided, you may not eat these. The camel, the rabbit, or the coney. Although they chew the cud, they do not have a split hoof. They are unclean to you. And the swine is unclean for you. Although it has a split hoof, it does not chew the cud. You must not eat their meat, nor touch their carcasses." Okay, and these animals help to clean up the earth. And if you remember, Pastor told us about the man, Jody Sparlin, who had a pig farm, and whenever something died, then he would take it to the pigs, and they would eat it all up. Okay, so these pigs will eat anything and help to clean up the earth. Also, vultures, lobsters, catfish, and shrimps. Even in our oceans, Yahweh's created animals to help clean up the earth. In Leviticus 11, Leviticus 11 also says the same thing. The coney or rock badger, in verse 5, the coney or rock badger, because it chews the cud, but does not have a split hoof, is unclean to you. The rabbit, because it chews the cud, but does not have a split hoof, is unclean to you. And the pig, although it has a split hoof completely divided, yet it does not chew the cud, it is unclean to you. Their meat you shall not eat, and their carcasses you shall not touch. They are unclean to you. And then it talks about the fish. Whatever has both fins and scales in the waters, whether in the seas or in the rivers, that you may eat. But everything in the seas or in the rivers that does not have both fins and scales, whether among all the fish that school or among all the other living creatures in the water, they are an abomination, and they will be an abomination to you. You must not eat their flesh, but you shall regard their carcasses as an abomination. Whatever is in the waters, not having both fins and scales, is to be abominable to you. In verse 13 it says, These you shall regard as abominable among the birds. They shall not be eaten, for they are an abomination, the eagle, the vulture, and the buzzard. Yahweh also created bees for the very purpose of giving the clean animals that we eat, pollinating the plants that they eat so they can grow, and then we can eat them. There's different animals that are used popularly around the world for different reasons. In the desert, they use camels instead of horses because they're a more efficient form of travel in the desert. In China, silkworms are raised to produce silk for cloth. Pigeons were the first tame birds used as food and message couriers. Chickens, ducks, and turkeys are commonly used around the world as sources of meat and eggs. All countries have laws designed to keep all animals in check, and there are hunting and fishing laws that every country provides. But Yahweh has better laws, better fishing and hunting laws, and for any questions about these laws, we can come to the House of Yahweh, and they'll show us these laws. Yahweh's designed every animal for a purpose and a reason to help and assist mankind. So in conclusion, we need to take care of all the animals and do not forget their job that they have on the earth in helping us. If you all please stand, it's my privilege and honor to turn over to the Great Kohan Kepha Hawkins.
Praise Yahweh. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. You may be seated, and may the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. It's a great joy and privilege to be able to address the called out ones of the House of Yahweh and to be a part of this work in these last days. And there's a lot of it. And the work that I'd like to focus on today, as we're approaching this Day of Atonement, this 7th year, I'd like to talk a little bit about unity. Unity, and the title of this speech today will be that unity is not achieved through half-hearted efforts. We can't expect to achieve this going at it half speed or 9 to 5 or part-time. Our calling in the House of Yahweh, we have to remember we were bought with a price. All right, our time is not our own. We all like to think that I'm in control. You can't tell me what to do, right? That's the carnal mind thinking that no one can tell us what to do. That's not the way of Yahweh. That's not what we were called here to do. Praise Yahweh. But this is actually a continuation of the sermon that I gave a couple weeks ago about that word, the number 97. And now that I've gotten through a lot of the definitions of the word, I can kind of get into the point of it. Sometimes, if you have a bunch of papers, it's like you're rushing to show all these definitions, and you don't really get time to stop and reflect on why this is such a joyful message. Why this is such a miraculous thing, why we have such a great hope to look forward to. Because we do. Brethren, we do. We've got the greatest joy in the world. Yahweh gives us great hope, but to the world He's only given to grow. They're all searching for answers. And, if you could just summarize all the news events here lately, it's like the world's going crazy and they're about to destroy each other. That's it. Everything is all geared towards that same theme because they don't have this message of peace that we have here in the House of Yahweh. But, as this Day of Atonement nears and our minds grow near to this thought of unity, it's important for us to know what it is and how to achieve it. And I just wanted to, maybe just refresh our memory and with the definition here. Here we go. Here's unity. It's the state, quality, or condition of accord or agreement, the combination or arrangements of parts into a whole. And that's one of the parts of the definition I wanted to focus on, to understand that this is a whole. It's not a part thing. Unity will never be achieved part-time, part-way. It has to be all our effort. We have to be seeking this with everything that we have right now, and not just saying it. Not just saying that, yes, we're in unity, but, doing the things that actually show. And for that, let's go to the Book of Yahweh in 1 Corinthians 3. This is found on page 888. All right, and look at chapter 3 and verse 3. He says, "For you are still carnal." Notice what defines us as being still carnal. "For since there is jealousy, strife, and divisions among you." Okay, so these are the things that we have to be examining ourselves daily to make sure that we're getting out of our lives, that is not a part of our character. Divisions, we need to be looking at anything that would divide us from one another, from the house of Yahweh, or from the message of Messiah, and eliminate them. Because our time is very, very short, and we need to be taking a close look at this. Let's look at verse 4 and 7. Because oftentimes we like to look at one another and cast judgment upon one another, or take credit for, our own advances, and thinking, well, I'm great at this. Why can't everybody else be great at this? Well, in verse 7 he says, "For who makes you different from one another? What do you have that's not been given to you?" Think about that. Think about that, house of Yahweh. What do we have that has not been given to us? Nothing. If we possess some skill, if we possess some great thing, it's only because it's been given to us. Yeah. Praise Yahweh. And if it was given to you, how can you boast as though if it were not? Okay? Well, I worked hard for this, and I did this, and I did, okay. We have to realize that Yahweh gives us the abilities and talents to attain everything, and without that we have nothing. Every blessing, every righteous thing comes from Yahweh. All right? So when we're dealing with each other, we have to remember that too. So if somebody's slow of learning, if somebody is slow to understand something, that also comes from Yahweh. What is us? What's up to us is to urge one another, to help one another, and to put forth the effort to help one another. If we have some gift, let us use it for the work of Yahweh. Because praise Yahweh, that's the only thing. It's the only thing that's important. Everything else is just something that we have to go through right now, but it's short-lived, and it will soon be going away. Look at 3 verse 9. He says, "For we are the laborers together of Yahweh." Together. We are the laborers together of Yahweh. All right? So I want you to be thinking on this page number is 888. And if you remember, back when we first started, doing the call-ins for confessions and reconciliation, remember that you could call in the line and you would say, 888. Everybody remember what that meant? Reconciliation, right? Okay, now, to reconcile, there we are. To reconcile means to reestablish a friendship. It does mean other things, scripturally, and it actually does represent this atonement. But I thought that was interesting, to reestablish a friendship between, to bring oneself to accept, and also look, it says to reconcile my way of thinking. To reconcile my way of thinking. Because if my way of thinking is not Yahweh's way of thinking, I need to change my way of thinking. It's that simple. We have to come into complete submission to be in unity with Yahweh. And acknowledge that. But this friendship, it made me think of what was written in Jacob, because these are some of the things that will divide us. If we look at, why am I at odds? Why am I falling short? What is it in me that's not allowing me to be in unity with what's being brought out in the house of Yahweh? Look at what causes it. In Jacob 4, on page 955, in verse 4, he says, "Do you not know that friendship of the world is enmity with Yahweh? Therefore, who will be a friend of the world is the enemy of Yahweh." Surely we don't want to be an enemy of Yahweh, but we have to realize that when we are friends with the world, when we partake of the things of this world, when we find our joy in worldly entertainment, when we're dealing with all these things that tie us back into this world, we're creating this enmity with Yahweh. And it's very serious, it's very plain and laid out. Look at 3 and verse 15. He says, "This wisdom does not descend from above, but is earthly, sensual, and demonic." And of course, this is talking about this very thing. Let's go back to verse 13. He says, "Who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show it by winning arguments with one another." No. Let him show it by his righteous conduct. His righteous conduct. By works done in the meekness, humility that comes from wisdom. This is wisdom. Not being quick to try to be engaged in arguments or win arguments. Well, this is a scriptural argument, so, the scriptures doesn't lead us to arguing. The scriptures show us how to dissolve arguments. We should be calm, peaceable. When these things arise between one another, we should be able to find a peaceful solution. Okay, this is what we're being trained to do, not to be on the debate team. But if you have bitter rivalry and strife in your hearts, do not boast and lie against the truth. This wisdom does not descend from above. It's earthly, sensual, demonic. Okay, so what would be causing us? What would be motivating us to choose this type of path rather than what we learn at the house of Yahweh? Because what we learn at the house of Yahweh is not that. What we're taught weekly in the house of Yahweh is how to conduct ourselves righteously, how to dissolve arguments, how to be at peace with one another. And you'll never have this peace, you'll never have this unity unless you completely submit to Yahweh 100%. Okay, so he says in verse 16, "For where rivalry and strife are, there is confusion and every evil work." Okay, recognize it, look for it, see it. "But the wisdom that is from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, and easy to be entreated, full of mercy, full of righteous fruits." That word entreated, part of the meaning means to be able to plead with words in order to persuade. In order to show somebody the right way. Not to shout at somebody and, "Hey, you do this," and blah, blah, blah. We have to be able to encourage and show with our words, the great hope that is within us. And these words, I'm going to go back to some of the definitions here for that 97. Because, I thought this was so, how can Yahshua put a number in the clouds and have it be just something to think of and have sermons? When you think about it, could you imagine just giving up and say, okay, 97, may the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you, and now for the next speaker. But when you look and you search these things, it's like such an awesome thing, that's done. Now, I just wanted to because this it really paints a goal for us to pursue. It shows us how to achieve it. And it shows us, what we can look for, what we can expect soon. But, this word 97, let me zoom out a little bit. Not caught in a trap without craftiness, without mixed motives. And we go back to the scripture, and this is what's being shown here, is in verse 17, but with the wisdom that is first from above is first pure. It's not mixed, okay? The wisdom that we learn in the house of Yahweh is not part world, part house of Yahweh. We have to be in this 100%. And that's shown, throughout the scriptures. Remember these lessons. We should all be reading this book of Yahweh and thinking about it, absorbing the message and the lessons that are in it every day. He says, surely not one of these men of this evil generation shall see that rich land that I promised to give to your fathers, except Caleb ben Jephunneh, because he shall see it, and to him and his children I will give the land that he has walked upon, because he wholeheartedly followed Yahweh. Not half-heartedly. He didn't show up once a week. He didn't, make excuses of why he couldn't be involved in this, that, or the other. The more I think of these things, I think of all the excuses of what keeps us from being involved in the work and being wholeheartedly in the house of Yahweh. But I'm tired. I need rest. I've noticed that rest doesn't stop you from being tired. It's kind of it's a deception to think that if I rest, then I will be not tired the next day. No, I figured out that if I rest, I'm tired the next day. If I work all night, I'm tired the next day. So what did I really accomplish by this great rest that everybody's seeking for? I got to take a vacation, If I just was able to take a vacation, I could come back refreshed. No, you come back in misery. You come back with this worldly mess in your mind that we have to work to get out again. That's what these things accomplish. So knowing where we're at, knowing what we have to do, knowing the time is so very, very short, we need to put all of our effort into doing this work. And by doing this, you will acquire something. If you turn to Revelation 3 on page 973, because this very thing is spelled out for us by our high priest. This is Revelation 3, and let's just look at verse 15. He says, I know your works, that you are neither hot or cold. Oh, that you were either hot or cold. So then, because you are lukewarm, neither hot or cold, I will spew you out of my mouth. I will not accept you. Because you say, I'm rich, I don't need anything, I'm fine, I'm doing okay. And do not even know that you're wretched and miserable. And look at verse 18. He says, I counsel you to buy gold that is tried in fire from me. Okay, so how do we attain this gold? I can't even afford a tire. How am I going to buy gold? Well, we achieve this. This is something that through the testing of our faith, through being involved in the work, through these laws, by practicing these laws. We can acquire this. This is something that can be acquired through our efforts. But it needs to be something sought after like we mean it. We can't just expect this to come about us, because, I'm in the house of Yahweh, so surely I deserve it. There's more to being in the house of Yahweh than just come here and sit down, We were called to do a work, but I want to show you some of the things that Yahweh has in store for us. Isaiah 61. I read this the last time I spoke, and I was kind of in going over a lot of these words in the definitions. I kept noticing that several of them were in both Isaiah 61 and Zechariah 9. It's like these two chapters speaking of the same thing in different ways. But we see a promise to us in verse 7. He said, instead of your shame, you will receive double honor. And instead of confusion, they will rejoice in their portion. Talking about this time period, this house of Yahweh. Therefore, in their land they will possess double, and everlasting joy will be theirs. For I, Yahweh, love justice. I hate robbery for the burnt offering. I will direct their work in truth, and I will establish my everlasting covenant with them. And their seed will be known amongst the Gentiles. And not so much like we are today, to where we're known as the hated ones. Yahweh is going to turn this around. And you're a complete idiot if you don't believe that. You would have to have just closed your eyes to everything that Yahweh is doing to not believe that in this time period, because He's working a very marvelous work right now in this time period. For as the earth brings, in verse 11, for as the earth brings forth its bud and garden, seed to grow, so Yahweh our Father will cause righteousness and praise to spring up before all the nations. Okay? Through this house. Through this work. But what we have to do right now is to work hard to achieve it. Okay? So, praise Yahweh. We have a lot of great things to look forward to. I would just like to encourage everybody, put all your effort into this and do it wholeheartedly. So with that, I would like to, if everybody please stand, to turn the services over to the Great Kohan, Odahyah Hawkins.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. You may all be seated. So a little bit more encouragement, so we seek it wholeheartedly. There's nothing like the encouragement of nuclear war, right? That gets you thinking. And we've heard it for many years out of the house of Yahweh, from our great teacher, from the one sent, about these deaths, this destruction that's going to come. And if you cannot see it after today, I don't know, as Vladimir Putin said, I don't know how else to tell you. Because there's not only threats, the emotions are running high. Remember, when decisions are made based on emotions, those decisions lead with regret. They're impulsive. They don't consider the facts. They make decisions based on what they want instead of what they need. But starting out, we see Haiti. Of course, Haiti just endured the hurricane that's hitting the East Coast. It's coming up the East Coast, Hurricane Matthew. But watch the destruction that has come through that very poor country. Remember, they just had an earthquake back in 2010 of devastation. And imagine a hurricane coming of 120 mile an hour winds, and you live in a country where everything is built from sheet metal. Imagine sheet metal flying at 120 mile an hour. That is utter destruction. They're right at now, they're saying 850 dead, but they're thinking they will go over 1,000 dead. And that is total destruction. Watch to see how fast people run to help Haiti. Make a song or something like that maybe, but watch to see what they actually do for them. And then Brexit. France, watch what France is doing now. You have the UK, they're wanting to pull out of the EU. France is saying they must not go unpunished. They must be punished for pulling out of the EU, and that will cause others to reconsider themselves leaving the European Union. They're trying to, by force, coerce people to stay part of this group that they gather fees and they gather taxes from to build their union that they have. And then Russia and the United States. There is a lot of news coming out, from military leaders, leaders that are diplomats, leaders that are supposed to be standing to help bring peace. And it's all centered around Aleppo. Don't forget that city of Aleppo. Russia feels that they need to defend the city of Aleppo because if they can break that city down and gather that back to the Assad government or the Syrian government, that they will be able to put down these rebel forces. And America is feeling that they need the rebel forces to take hold of Aleppo because they want to remove the Assad government. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to see that America wants Assad gone, Russia wants Assad to stay, and there will not be any bending on that agreement. Well, it got so bad this last week where Army generals of the United States were telling Russia, we will beat you down like you've never been beat before. And the State Department's words were, we will send Russia home in body bags. They are making threats. Russia is not taking it lightly. The United States, of course, is offering more threats. The interesting part to notice is that watch where the State Department, when he's speaking, he says, we tried Obama's plan. In other words, we tried going without war. We tried diplomacy. Remember what John Kerry asked for. Remember who he met with. Last week we showed he met with the Vatican. He wanted force. They want force. Well, this Battle of Aleppo, they're wanting to establish, now they call it a safe zone. That's the same words used for a no-fly zone. Senator Lindsey Graham makes it quite clear what that safe zone or that no-fly zone will mean over Damascus or over Aleppo. If you fly your Russian planes here, we will shoot them down. And that's what the United States is telling Russia. They want to establish this. Russia, of course, this last week just moved in more air defense missiles to defend their planes, to defend their military. Now, how ironic would it be that you have two people vying for that top spot that Malachi Martin spoke about, and they're fighting right around, in and around the great river Euphrates, just like Yisrayl Hawkins has said for many years. Praise Yahweh. Now, last but not least, this actually just took place right before services, and they say a huge explosion reported in Yemen, capital of Sana'a, and scores of casualties are feared. Now, the article, this is reported by RT, and the article says an explosion has reportedly rocked Sana'a, the capital of Yemen, and pictures of ravaged buildings have appeared on social media that include reports claiming the blast was caused by a Saudi-led airstrike. Images of destroyed buildings, partly still aflame, have emerged on social media, with some people alleging, of course, that devastation. And then it goes on to say there has been no official confirmation as to what exactly caused the destruction, so they're still waiting for a confirmation, but they're saying that was a Saudi-led airstrike. Yet some people allege that dozens of civilians were killed and scores injured in the alleged bombardment, a witness told the Xinyu news agency. Sputnik news agency was also told by a source at the scene that the incident was caused by Saudi-led bombardment, that dozens of people are dead or injured, adding that the alleged airstrike had targeted a hall where the Houthi rebels had been paying their last respects to the father of the rebels' interior minister. The total count of those injured and dead may reach into the hundreds. That is just today alone, and that is a huge airstrike. And remember, listen to what Senator Graham has to say about the Arabs. The Arabs that the United States back do not want Assad to stay in power. And remember what we brought out a month ago about that oil pipeline they're wanting to run through Syria. Now that airstrike, just so you know, you can write these numbers down. It was reported by RT at 13:43 GMT, and that is Greenwich Mean Time. 13:43 GMT. That would be 9:43 Eastern Standard Time. And then we have 8:43 Central Standard Time. Now write those numbers down. I'm sure you will need them. At this time, if we could go ahead and play the news.
Pay close attention. What you're about to see is Bible prophecy being fulfilled.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you news as it relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yisrayl Hawkins. Well, we have a powerful hurricane that wreaked havoc on the Caribbean islands. We also have that same hurricane heading toward the southeast coast of the United States. We're going to talk a little bit about the cost of leaving the European Union for the UK, and also continuing conflict between the United States and Russia over Syria. But we're going to start off with some media reports that were given citing the U.S. government sources saying that Washington is considering military strikes against Syria's government after America severed talks with Russia over the Syrian peace process. Also, as a note, Washington understands that a potential attack against Assad forces will bring America and Russia closer to conflict.
White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest said at a press conference there's a risk associated with taking strikes at regime targets. That risk includes attacking a regime that does continue to maintain a robust air defense system. It also edges U.S. and Russian military forces closer to confrontation. That doesn't serve anybody's interest.
Well, the peace process in Syria is being hampered as a result of America's cutting its ties with Russia over the Syrian peace process. Washington blamed Russia for being ineffective in its fight against ISIL, and in reaction, Moscow replied, the U.S. is ready to strike a deal with the devil to achieve its aims in Syria. So as diplomacy falters, what will the U.S. do next is the question on the minds of many.
According to the U.S. State Department's U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry said that the Assad regime and Russia rejected diplomacy. On September 12th, when the ceasefire took effect, Russia and the U.S. were on a diplomatic path. When the State Department spokesperson Mark Toner was asked if it failed when the rebel groups used the ceasefire to strengthen their positions and when ISIL nearly took over Deir ez-Zor after the U.S. bombing of the Syrian military, admitted by mistake, did those things play no role in the failure of that deal?
Yeah, that was the question. Well, Mr. Toner's response, well, there was a series of events, including the attack, by mistake, he said, on Syrian forces, followed by the attack on humanitarian convoy, and then subsequently attacks on civilian targets in Aleppo. Well, we can talk about opposition groups using the pause to resupply, he said. That's a reality. So, Jeff, it sounds like he's saying that those things did play a part in the failed deal, and the State Department does concede that the rebels did have a role to play as well.
Now, Washington's narrative is that Assad and Russia suddenly rejected diplomacy and chose a military solution. Now, if you remember, Kerry was also for a military solution when he stated, I've argued for the use of force. I stood up, I'm the guy who stood up and announced we're going to attack Assad because of the weapons, and then, things evolved into a different process.
So I wonder why there's this surprise that so-called Russia and Assad is wanting military force when the United States was at one point. Seems like they would still be on the same page, but apparently not. Many within the U.S. government are challenging the single policy on the Syrian war with the Obama administration, and which is once again considering a military action. And we may once again see the divergence of views within the administration on how to proceed in Syria.
Another move by Washington has strained relations with Russia over the Syrian crisis. The U.S. blocked a Russian statement condemning a recent shelling of the Russian embassy in Damascus. RT spoke with Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova about the current diplomatic deadlock. She said, the whole time we were in negotiations, we realized very quickly that the United States had no joint position. Different organizations and structures in Washington were taking different positions on what is going on in Syria, and they have absolutely different views.
Sounds like a lot of confusion. That's right. She continued, that was most difficult in our bilateral negotiations because we were not dealing with a partner with a joint view. We were dealing with people who were changing their opinion and point of view on what is going on in Syria actually every day. These concerns were also admitted by people in Washington that, in fact, they were having a lot of change of views.
James Carden from the Nation magazine talked about establishing a no-fly zone and how it could be the next move from Washington. In an interview with RT, he said, "There's going to be a lot of pressure on the president to institute a no-fly zone, or the so-called safe zones in northern Syria, and that would put us on the road to direct confrontation with the Russian Federation, Iran, and Syria."
Continuing, he said, when you implement a no-fly zone, you necessarily have to commit acts of war. And we know that there are Russian troops on the ground and in the air, as well as the Syrian Air Force, and of course the Iranians are there helping as well. And even the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff said that these things aren't easy. It sounds easy to impose a no-fly zone, but the reality is much different.
Well, we now turn our attention over to our field correspondent, Larry McGee, who has the particulars on a CBS This Morning interview. Larry, who was their guest and what did he have to say?
Big interview this week with Senator Lindsey Graham, who is a member of the Senate Arms Committee, and he sat down with reporters to offer his insight on the escalating crisis in the Euphrates region and the ongoing destruction of Damascus in particular. That, in fact, was the first topic up for discussion, with the question being what the senator thought was the best hope to try and save the people of Aleppo and what the U.S. should do. The senator's response was that there are three things worth considering, and the first is how do you stop the flow of refugees out of Syria, one being slaughtered in Syria and going to Europe and eventually making their way here to the U.S. The senator says the goal is to ensure that people are not being slaughtered and that they have a place where they'll be protected. The idea with the most support in that respect seems to be the notion of creating a safe and/or no-fly zone. But if that option is pursued, then Senator Graham believes the U.S. will be tested because once such a zone has been established, what is the U.S. prepared to do in the event that Syrian planes fly over it? Analysts believe that the actual issue, therefore, is enforcement. Is the U.S. willing to employ American warplanes over Syria in order to enforce a no-fly zone? President Obama said no to the option, but both Mike Pence and Hillary Clinton have expressed a willingness to move forward with it. Senator Graham says that unless we are willing to shoot down planes that enter the space to attack people that they call enemies, but that America calls victims, then it won't work. The talk specifically turned towards the possibility of Russian planes, to which the senator replied that if the U.S. is not willing to shoot down Russian planes, then it would not be a safe zone. The Arms Committee member went further to say that if Russia believed we would shoot them down, then they would not bomb. The next subject up for dialogue was North Korea and Iran, both nations of which the senator believes are areas of concern due to their missile programs and the perception of their instability. The big question, he believes, is what would take place in terms of a game changer if either nation had the ability to hit the American homeland. Senator Graham holds that the incoming president should be willing to attack North Korean nuclear facilities, and he suspects that if America were willing to do as much, then North Korea would actually cease its program. He also believes that Iran would dismantle its program if they truly believe that the U.S. would reimpose sanctions. Senator Graham attributes the boldness of America's perceived enemies to pacifism on the part of the standing president, who has exhibited a distaste for warfare and a preference for dialogue. It is an approach that the senator does not believe is shared by the Democratic frontrunner, whom he believes will be more than willing to employ military force. It is difficult to imagine a political conversation had at present that doesn't eventually focus on President Putin, who is viewed by some to be taking advantage of the current U.S. presidential race to push the Russian agenda in the Euphrates. Senator Graham foresees a land grab in Syria by the wayward member of the quartet during the time between now and when the next president is inaugurated, and he believes Aleppo will be destroyed in the next coming months. The senator believes that the Orthodox Russian head is a dictator, and if it were him, he says he would challenge President Putin on Syria. His position would be to train a regional force to usurp the Syrian government, he says, and if Russia bombs the people that America America trains, then he says that would be a confrontation between the U.S. and Russia. When pressed to be more specific, Senator Graham says he would shoot them down. On Syria, his thinking ultimately is that there is currently no military pressure on President Assad at this moment to make him leave his office. And without military pressure, President Assad stays. And none of the circumstances in Syria that the West would like to alter will ever change. For IPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Kohan Kepha, back to you.
Well, it seems like everyone in Washington is itching for an attack. Now, the weather continues to be outrageous across the globe, Jeff, while Hurricane Matthew is spinning its way along the southeast coast of the United States. It has already brought devastating blows to the island of Haiti. At this point, the number of dead is unclear due to the extreme extent of the destruction, but there are reports that it could be as high as 800. The storm has also left thousands of people homeless and is the worst natural disaster in the country since the magnitude 7 earthquake that hit the Caribbean island in 2010.
Well, in France, there seems to be a storm brewing of a different kind. The French President François Hollande is warning Britain it will have to pay a heavy price for leaving the European Union. There must be a threat. There must be a risk. There must be a price, he said, arguing that his stance is necessary. Otherwise, quote, the principles of the EU will be questioned. So it sounds like they want to make a statement here.
Yeah, seems like it. Well, Hollande also believes allowing the UK to leave without consequences will risk other countries wanting to do the same to enjoy the supposed benefits without any downsides.
Well, France and the UK aren't the only countries struggling to get along. Tensions have recently flared up between Moscow and Washington since the breakdown of Syria's ceasefire deal brokered by the two countries. Fearing the U.S. will continue to target Syrian government forces in the war-torn country, Russia's defense ministry cautions their western neighbor against such actions. A spokesman for the defense ministry brought up the fact that Russia has their S-300 and S-400 air defense missile systems covering a surprisingly large radius. And the way he said it, Kohan, it's like, you're going to be surprised just how far we can reach out there and touch you.
Interesting. The spokesman said, quote, it must be understood that Russian air defense missile crews will unlikely have time to clarify via the hotline the exact fire program of the missiles or the ownership of their carriers. He continued, any U.S. attacks on areas controlled by Syrian government could jeopardize lives of Russian troops.
The U.S. is not taking Russia's words lightly, Kohan. Washington has threatened to impose costs on Russia over the Syrian conflict without UN backing. Now, this may be the harshest warning thus far from America. What began as criticism a few weeks ago has quickly shifted to direct threats.
Interesting. Well, from the Secretary of State to the U.S. Ambassador to the UN and many officials in between, the rhetoric is ramping up severely. U.S. Ambassador Samantha Power went as far as to say what Russia is sponsoring and doing is not counterterrorism, it's barbarism. And the White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest made a provocative statement when he said, in this case, I wouldn't rule out multilateral efforts outside of the UN to impose cost on Syria or Russia or others with regard to the situation inside of Syria.
If you remember, it was only a month ago that the U.S. and Russia were holding peace talks, which brought about the 7-day ceasefire that we talked about in Syria. But now the war of words is as threatening as the physical armies. John Kirby, a spokesman in the State Department, said recently of the moderate rebels the U.S. supports, extremist groups will continue to exploit the vacuums that are there in Syria to expand their operations, which will include, no question, attacks against Russian interests, perhaps even Russian cities. Russia will continue to send troops home in body bags.
Wow. But how did it get to this boiling point so quickly? Well, there are, of course, some key factors leading up to the current situation. First, the U.S. broke the ceasefire when it killed 60 Syrian army soldiers who were on the front lines battling ISIL. While Secretary of State John Kerry admitted this took place, he also called it, quote, a terrible accident.
Well, secondly, the United States promised they would separate the terrorists of al-Nusra from the so-called moderate rebels, which they support. However, many months later, the U.S. is still backing both the rebels and the terrorists, but it doesn't end there.
Next, we have the U.S. military officials like Deputy Chief of Staff Joseph Anderson making their position brutally clear. He stated, the next group here is fighting against the regional military powers. These are existential for us and our allies. In other words, necessary for our survival.
He continued, the threat for this type of fight is a nation state with moderate capabilities, aggressive behavior, and engaging in militarized competition. So who would you pick for that one? Anderson concluded, I think it would be Russia.
Well, another U.S. Army Chief of Staff, Mark Milley, spoke about retaliating even if the enemy only thought about hurting the United States. He said, I want to be clear to those who wish to do us harm. We'll stop you and we'll beat you harder than you have ever been beaten before. While these words are coming from their mouths, U.S. officials are claiming Russia is being aggressive. So seems like it's a
kettle black.
Exactly.
But there are some people out there who recognize the erratic behavior of Washington, like Michael Raddy, co-editor of BS News. Raddy told RT in an interview, the lunatic warhawks have taken over in Langley, in the Pentagon, and also in the White House. The spokesperson there talking about costs, and remember we said that there are going to be costs there, and the Russian cities being hit, Russian soldiers coming home in body bags. That to me sounds like an indirect order to terrorists to strike wherever they want to.
Interesting. Well, news media groups are saying it's like all the talk of peace has been forgotten. And a recent headline from Independent News reads, future war with Russia or China would be extremely lethal and fast, U.S. General warns.
Well, the 1 hour burning Yisrayl Hawkins has revealed from the Holy Scriptures is on the way. The lines are being drawn and all sides are hoping to come out on top. The only problem is, in nuclear war, there are no winners. Well, just as the nuclear burning is prophesied, so is the protection for those who come out of this world and start keeping Yahweh's set appointments. Well, don't wait another day. Call, email, or write the House of Yahweh and start receiving the information that is vital to your salvation. Here's how.
And when you contact the House of Yahweh, don't forget to request your free copy of the monthly newsletter and the Prophetic Word magazine. To contact the House of Yahweh, you can write them at the House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can call them at 1-800-613-9494 or visit them on any of their websites at www.yahweh.com, www.yisraelhawkins.com, or www.yahwehsbranch.com. You can also visit our website at www.ypnnews.com. You can also email them at info@yahweh.com. And for all calls outside the United States, please call the number on your screen. And of course, don't forget the best study resource to the Holy Scriptures on the market, the Yisrael Says program. You can find that at www.yisraelsays.com.
Well, don't go anywhere. Up next is another enlightening message from Yisrayl Hawkins. From all of us here at YPN News, I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
And I'm Katan Alexander.
Thanks for watching.
If everyone would please stand, I want to read you a headline that just came out earlier today from the UK news, and this is put out by yahoo.com. The title of the headline is, World War III is going to be very fast and very lethal, Pentagon warns. Very fast, 1 hour, and very lethal. At this time, I'd like to introduce the greatest teacher in the world, the Great Kohan Yisrayl Abel Hawkins.
Praise Yahweh. We got a crowd. Pretty soon, 2 billion. 2 billion. Praise Yahweh. Let's go big. You may be seated. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. We got things that's beginning to pop. That 1 hour going to be really fast. This coming straight from the Pentagon, and of course this is nothing new to you, but you know it's going to last 1 hour. That's it. I was waiting to get this bit of news here and find. Here we go. Now, while the world is getting ready to make a 1 hour burning that will kill 4/5 of the Earth's population, Yisrayl Hawkins says the Feast of Tabernacles is a week away and explains significance in newsletter this week. I would have figured maybe 20,000 people would have read that, but they called me this morning. The number was, this just put out now, but the number, it's topped all records. 78,340. That was about 8:30 or so, and they checked it just now and sent this to me to show me how fast it's coming up. I said, I think that's going to top 80,000 before we start speaking. Well, this same article now is up to 80,012. And, of course, the other news media is up to 87 million to 275,564. Wow. I can't even count that high. Praise Yahweh. The peaceful scene, I was asked to say something. No, the refugees. Here it is. The refugee camp we have across from the peaceful scene. You're seeing a lot of this, and of course they're going to be coming to the house very soon. Praise Yahweh. Who is a refugee? A refugee is someone who has been forced to flee his or her country because of persecution, war, violence. A refugee has a well-founded fear of persecution for reasons of race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. Most likely they cannot return home or are afraid to do so. War and ethnic, tribal, and religious violence are leading causes of refugee fleeing their countries. Now, we want to get this on film. Our own refugee camp, you might have seen over in the war-torn area across from the peaceful scene. It's just crossed east by the bombs, and it's not finished yet by a long shot, but we want to get some films today of the refugees inside the war camp. And then today, and then we'll be taking the tents out and then setting them up later after the refugee camp is finished, setting them up again later, and we'll get some more pictures then at the last part of it. If you want to be a part of that and you got some dirty clothes and shaggy hair, well, I guess all of you could, huh? Oh, you come dressed for it. Okay. Oh, you look great. You know you do. But anyway, if you want to be a part of it, well, see Judge Kalaya or Judge Tana, and they'll get you in the scene, show you what to do. This is going to be a great movie. I want to get it behind the song of the 10 Kings, and that and much more. We can never get enough in there. Need to make the songs longer, I think. Maybe we could get enough news behind it then. This article right here, I've got to read it. It shows that they have an understanding of what's going on, but that not as much as you do, and where it's coming from. But maybe when we can get this sermon out, maybe this sermon and the ones that are lined up to be brought in Feast of Tabernacles, which is still a week away. I thought it was this week and thought it was last week, and somebody told me we still had another week. I read it on the news. I don't think it's ever going to get there. It seems like it's never going to get here. This is going to be the best feast ever. We've had the best trials ever. The best trials that I've seen so far, and everybody went through them in flying colors, full rainbow. It's beautiful. This says U.S. seeks to enforce global dominance by unleashing war on countries who oppose it. And this is Assad, the king of Syria. Time is not going to continue. It's here. It's going to end in this year. And we've got a big work ahead of us. We will be able to do it. Yahweh will see to it that we do. In an interview to Iranian magazine, Tehran Foreign Policy Studies, quarterly, on Wednesday, the Syrian president argued that the U.S. resort to force. Now, if you remember, this is what they did in Samuel when they said, we want a king. We don't want Yahweh reigning over us. We want our own king. Well, of course, pretty soon every one of the 12 tribes had kings, and they were all fighting against each other. And this is what you saw. Well, of course, to make a long story short, four of these religions, the strongest religions, were all got organized, like you see Russia, China, Pakistan just joined the group, by the way. There's others that's joining them and saying, we're more powerful than the United States now because of this combination that we put together. Well, in order to bring peace, it's always in order to bring peace, we've got to do this. So they organized this strong army called the Roving Army to begin with, and this was four of these religions that did this. If you remember what I brought out not too long ago, they were not worshiping Yahweh. And the 12 tribes never worshiped Yahweh. There was a few that Yahweh called out, and he could do so at any time. But he allowed them to go their own ways, and they wanted the kings, so the kings took the four strongest religions, built a huge roving army that enlisted and paid big salaries to their armed forces to join them and stand on their part. And of course, from that, they actually took over the land of Israel, Jerusalem, and they're listed in Yahshua's day as managers of the city and the House of Yahweh. They took over the House of Yahweh. The army stood on their part, as Daniel 11:31 says, stood on their part, and they polluted the sanctuary. And then, of course, they removed it in 70 AY. They removed it, all the artifacts, all the wealth. If you could imagine the wealth that they took from the people in Israel, it had to be trillions, up in the trillions of gold and silver and everything. And they moved all of this to Rome. And of course, they continued their spread, and they spread into their groups. They got so well organized. You read in history that Judah, and I get this because you're going to read a bunch of lies. You read in history that Judah was destroyed. You know, they took too many wars and they just disappeared off of the face of the earth. Well, all 12 tribes disappeared off of the face of the earth, they think, you know. But that's because they didn't know the prophecy, so they didn't know what to look for that comes next. But they are ruling from Rome today, of course, but they've got tentacles that reach into every nation, and you see the evidence of that when the Supreme Court has more Catholics than Christians on it, so they can do the Vatican's bidding and just put forth a law to try to put down righteousness in the Scriptures, passing the law of sodomy and making it legal in the United States. Now, this shows the power they have from where they sit. They have authority in other countries, even Russia, but Russia is holding down their religion. Otherwise, they would be under the authority like the West is, like what we call the West or the United States. The United States is under the leadership of the Vatican today. Well, Assad is seeing close to this, and he's made these statements, and of course they say the United States is not the superpower any longer. They're lying there too. The United States is the superpower, and they will find out, because 4/5 of the Earth's population is going to be destroyed in this fast war. And just like the Pentagon said, it's going to be fast. The Scripture says the same thing, going to be 1 hour. But he says the Syrian president argued that the U.S. resorts to force every time it fears a challenge to its cult, the clout and ability to control the international agenda unilaterally. The president said, adding that the real motive behind U.S. military intervention into foreign countries is to coerce them to submit to American authority, as in the case with Syria. Did you get all that? Do I need to read it again? Pay attention, because this is very important to understanding the prophecy that's going to be brought this feast, along with the numbers, that I've got people working on right now. But he says, Washington spares no means to inflict losses on its ideological rebels, including terrorism, psychological and emotional methods, Assad said. However, he thinks that a biased coverage of the conflict by mainstream media delivers one of the most significant blows. Mainstream media, if you notice, we experienced it here, and I thought, well, the media I had it in the back of my mind that the media would report the news, and it would report it accurately. And then I find out the hard way, over a period of years, the mainstream media is owned by the religions in Abelin, and they will report what the religions tell them to report and no more. And that's the way it went with the House of Yahweh. They reported lies about the House of Yahweh. They told lies, many of them. And of course the people were like I was, they just they thought that this was truth concerning the House of Yahweh. But everything the House of Yahweh does, it's voiced in the churches here. If you were attending the churches, you'd hear it probably almost every Sunday morning, the reports of what the House of Yahweh is doing. When we put a post in the ground, they asked our workers when they come in to buy things, they asked them, "What are y'all building out there now?" And they don't even live out here. They live in Abelin. Now someone is telling them, what we're doing out here. And no telling what lies they'll put there before it actually goes up. But Washington spares no means, and the mainstream media, of course, is dealing false blows to the nations. The media is used. Malachi Martin said propaganda is used, not truth, but propaganda by the Vatican, and they have men that's trained in this for years. It's like psychology, and they're using it to persuade the people. Here we're talking not only about the minds of the officials, but about the people, about the wrong analyst of what is happening and presenting things in a distorted way. If Syria manages to withstand the pressure and uproot the terrorism from its soil, the victory will pave the way for spread of ideas of independent development in the world. That is what the West fears. Do you get that? That is what the West fears. Because of it's not just the West now, and I'll show you in just a little bit as we get into the scriptures. I mean, it's not just America. and of course, America is getting its strength. If you notice, we got not only the United States here, where we're setting up missile bases, but we're setting them throughout the Middle East also. So the United States will be able to strike those nations really close-like. If they set off a bomb in Russia, we could hit them. The United States would hit them before that bomb hit the United States. That's the missiles that we got in different places in that country and all throughout that country. And of course, Russia has fought against this. Many, with every setup that we have called missile defense, they have voiced their opinions against it to the UN, but the United States owns the UN through the Vatican. The Vatican practically owns the world. Yahweh has given them free rein. He's not drawn back. The only thing he says is, you can't touch my house in these last days. And he says, my house is going to take the truth and the prophecies and the laws to all nations. This time, the people will have a choice. Well, the Vatican most of all. This is the fears of the Vatican most of all. And this was what Malachi Martin brought out in his book, The Keys of This Blood. Keys of this blood. In Genesis 49 shows you the bloodline. And the keys of this blood shows, don't let history tell you a lie, it tells you that Yada is in control. And his brothers are worshiping him, doing what he says from the 7 hills of Rome, bringing forth abominations to all the earth, and going to bring forth certain death, 1 hour of burning to all the earth. Assad said, adding that what will happen in Syria will affect the political map. The Assyrian president does not believe that the U.S. foreign policy may change its tack in the foreseeable future, as wars are in the interest. Now get this, please. Wake up now and listen. Wars are in the interest of American powerful lobby groups, in particular arms and oil lobbying. Now, if you've seen what's occurring in the African states, if you've paid any attention to that and you know what's taking place in the Vatican trying to rule the world, they have their tentacles there. And those who are suffering from this, if you'll just lend an ear, I'll tell you what's taking place. They control the governments like they do here. They could do the same thing here that they're doing there. And they're building up to this to where they can shut the nations down, any nation down, because it's all the way the nations are operated. It's all on trade. The ships stand out when this is destroyed. Who's going to buy our stuff now? Remember chapter 18 of Revelations. Keep that in mind. Now, in Africa, they told the cities, stop paying. You're in debt. You can't pay. So they stopped paying the people who were running businesses, who were teaching the schools, who were running the city. And they said, we don't have the money to pay you this month. Well, next month came. Well, no, we still don't have the money to pay you. Next month came. They still don't have the money to pay. So here come the foreclosures. Now, they had the money to foreclose, but they didn't have the money to pay. And they would not let these people go over. So they took their land or forced them to sell it to, guess who? Oil lobbyist? But anyone else in the gold business or whatever. Africa is a very wealthy commonwealth country. It tops anything that I know of anywhere in the world. But it's easily taken over right now because of these tentacles that have said, don't pay, don't buy, we don't have the money. They've got it set up to where they can break that person, the persons who are governing the land there, who own the land. This is what's taking place, and no one seems to notice it but us, who know what's taking place. Well, those people are becoming refugees, and they are going to need a place to come and stay. Nobody wants them because their skin is black, their skin is yellow, their skin is brown. No, that doesn't have anything to do with it. It's their religion. And they don't want Catholicism, and of course this is what's bringing them down. Just like South America. We see it, the same thing taking place there. And the Pope goes down there to see if they're willing to submit. And of course they said, no, we're not. So the trouble is getting deeper now. And wars are breaking out. And there's a big change taking place in that country there, with just below us here, just a little ways, and people starving, people selling out, and so forth. Well, he says there is no point in analyzing U.S. policies on the basis of common sense. as it is guided by the factional interest, Assad said. It's the faction or factional interest. The factional, it's guided by the factional interest. And that word, if you'll write it down or try to understand it, it's a party or group, as within a government. And that's what you see in the U.S. This word he used here, factional, it's a party or group as within a government that is often contentious, self-seeking. That's what the apostle said. No love for anyone except self-interest. And that's what you see taking place in Africa at this time. But not only Africa. This is just more obvious in Africa than anywhere else. But it's taking place in other countries. Party spirit, that's Masonism, when marked by dissension, contentions, and, of course, quarreling. The political interest, this started, if you go back to Genesis 49 now, with this in mind, that was spelled out here. He doesn't understand this. Assad sees what's taking place. He, Putin, other world leaders are talking and saying this is what's taking place. This is what's being set up. They're wanting to govern the whole world. They want a new world government. If I put it that way, maybe that will open some eyes. A new world government, and this is what Malachi Martin brought out too. And he said in his book, The Keys of This Blood, we could have trouble with Russia and China because they are people, they're nations that have managed to keep their own wealth inside the nations. And he said, this the Vatican doesn't like. And of course, they are going to go to war. Scripture shows it, as well as they know it there also now. They're realizing this is what's going to take place, and they're realizing they can do this within an hour. 1 hour. It's all going to be over. The United States hopes to come out on top. The Vatican hopes to come out on top. Russia and China hope to come out on top. They all know it's coming, and they hope to come out on top, each one of them. So this means first strike quickly. And it could come at any time. But here in Genesis 49 now, then Jacob called his sons. This is the heads of Jacob. I brought out a lot on that in the newsletters and in some of the sermons. So the heads of Jacob, they were called, had taken over Israel with their kings. And then Daniel says, I saw this fourth beast forming out of the earth. That is, out of the people of the earth. This fourth beast forming. The same beast that everyone, even the Christians, know this. The commentaries speak on it and say this fourth beast is Rome. That's the ones that fit this. And of course they all understand that part, but they go ahead and go to church on Sunday following this beastly system that is condemned, and Yahweh says it's going to destroy itself. Speaking of destruction, again, don't ever think that Yahweh would destroy anyone. Yahweh is trying to get the people not to do this and saying you're going to destroy yourself. Well, this lake of fire he's going to cast you into. Now, if we could get all these scriptures translated correctly, there would be no problem. But it takes time. It's took us several years in this already. If we had the use of our subconscious minds, we could do it in a matter of week from our own press room. But we don't have it. But if you had this correctly translated, it would show that Yahweh is warning about a lake of fire that they're building themselves. And it started in 1934 when knowledge was increased to them. They started building this lake of fire. This means to bring about a lake of fire that's going to burn the earth. Now, this is not the Armageddon lake of fire that everybody keeps getting mixed up. That's the second death. This first death is coming with bombs that's going to burn the earth in 1 hour. The second death, yes, they're going to build that one too. It seems almost stupid, or unspeakable, unthinkable, that after this took place, and they're given 100 years now, is all they're given to come back. That's pretty close to what Yahweh gave his sons to tear up the earth. But they're going to be given 100 years. And they're going to go back to the same rulership again, trying to rule with force instead of guide with righteousness. Now that's the difference in, of course, the house of Yahweh and the world. But after this great destruction takes place, and 1,000 years later, they're going to be resurrected, these people that killed themselves, and they're going to be given 100 years, and they're still, many of them are going to go back to that, and they're going to build another lake of fire, which will be the second death, to which there is no resurrection. Well, I'm telling you this in a nutshell, but I've told it I think it's in the Mark of the Beast. I think I put that information in the Mark of the Beast. But anyway, here you see the 12 tribes, and if you'll notice the scripture, the last words there, in the last days. He's showing. Then Jacob called his sons. They're called heads of Jacob later by Micah, the great prophet Micaiah, that said, in the last days I will establish my house. I'm going to draw out a remnant like a shepherd who grabs a couple of ribs out of a beast that the lion killed, and he grabs a couple of ribs or a leg. Well, that's what Yahweh is doing. He's taking the ones that he wants. He's brought these down, studied their genes, has a perfect record of their genes. He knows what you're going to do and calls you to his house, and then proves you proves you whether you will. And you gone through some great proof this last week. It may get worse now. I know you'll pass it, but it may get worse between now and Tuesday. Tuesday, Day of Atonement, starts Monday at sunset. Don't anyone miss that. Look forward to it. Praise Yahweh that you got the opportunity. Then Jacob called for his sons. These are the sons of Jacob that became the heads of the nations, that formed the roving army that became, along with their Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, and Herodians, that was the religions. It was the religions that was at war with each other. It's still religions that it is at war with each other all over the world. Well, he said he gathered together so I may tell you what will befall you in the last days. Well, of course, this was a prophet of Yahweh, a righteous Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Yahshua said, you're going to see them in the kingdom. Speaking of the Pharisees, Sadducees, and Essenes, who were their children, their offspring. And he said, but you will be cast out. You won't make it. You're seeking to kill me, the one that's telling you the truth, he said. Well, he said the last days now. Last days. Now keep in mind the words of Yahshua when he says in Luke 24 and verse 25, "Oh, fools, fools, unbelieving, all that the prophets have spoken." And then what Yahweh said in Isaiah 34:16, search out the book of Yahweh and read. He said, not one of these is going to fail. Talking about the prophecies and the laws, not one of them. He said, I am their shepherd. And not one of these is going to fail. And Yahshua says you're a fool if you don't believe all that the prophets have spoken. With that, let's go over to Revelations 21. I've got to spend a little time on that one. Revelations 21. Revelations 21. Don't ever let Satan know that you got a doubt. If you got a doubt, go to Yahweh instantly and tell him to slap your face or wake you up, beat you on the head or something to get the doubt back to Satan who gave it to you to begin with. Remember, she's great at that. She took Eden, the protected place. That's what Eden means. They were well secure. They were being taught the laws of Yahweh, peace, joy, love, abundant living. And she went to Eve and turned her against Yahweh, deceiving her. Well, today she has trillions of ways of deceiving. It's all going to crash very shortly now, but she has trillions of ways to deceive people into following the Baal, Cush, Nimrod system. The Cush-Nimrod system. You should be well acquainted with that by now. In Revelations 21, look at verse 8 first. He says, but the fearful and the unbelieving, he says, and the abominable. Well, of course, the abominations, Yahweh showed the heads of Jacob. This is in Isaiah 65, 2 through about 5. And he said, though following the priest who eat pork. Following the priest who eat pork. That sermon was brought this morning by one of our young deacons, did a great job. But Isaiah 65, he shows this. He says, I've spread out my hands all day to you, from early till late and so forth, warning you of what you're doing. And this is going to take place, he said. Then Isaiah 66:17, he said, you're all going to be consumed together. Now that was the report of the sons of Jacob, who Jacob was actually warning them then what their rebellion was going to bring in the last days. Not at that time. They were going to travel through 6,000 years of history here, travel through, and then at the end, in this last generation that began in 1934, he said, you're going to consume yourselves in this. That's the way it should have been written. But the fearful and unbelieving and abominable, that is, bringing forth, following the priests that eat pork, breaking Leviticus 11, which was brought out this morning, of eating unclean animals. And of course, I've got a stack of articles that shows the poisons that come into the body, and from that, and sexual sins and so forth. Guard yourself this feast. Don't let lust, even if it's exposed to you, don't expose it. Don't dress your body up to cause lust during this feast. Don't ever do it. But don't allow your eyes to fill your mind with lust. It shuts off the understanding that you need right here. And you're going to need it worse as we get closer here and see the dangers. Someone was expressing, they sent an email and they said, it's really getting scary. What do we do? Well, remember what Yahweh said. You're in the protected place. But Satan, if Satan can pull you out with lust, or if you pull someone else out by dressing up your body to make somebody lust after it illegally, Yahweh said, if you do this to one of the little ones, then you're guilty and will suffer this burning along with those who brought it about. You're not going to get into the kingdom unless you get your mind on bringing peace, joy, and love to the world rather than lust, wars, and fighting to the world, and sickness and disease. Well, this right here, he shows the unbelieving, and he lists with it the priest who bring forth abominations that he spoke of in Isaiah 65, 2 through 5, as following the priest who eat pork, eat swine's flesh. That's what you're doing when you do this. You're bringing forth abominations. Whether it's the eating of the pork or bringing forth the lust, you're guilty of bringing people or causing little ones to sin. You're a murderer. And that's what Yahshua tells you. Don't do it. Just don't do it. You don't need it. What you need is to display righteousness. If they don't lust after righteousness, they don't really need to be here in the house. Or maybe they need help from their counselors. Saying, change your clothes. Put something on over this. Jezebel is a certain example of this following the person who eats pork and their minds were poisoned. She painted her face and stuck it out the window for the men to lust after. And the prophet said, the dogs are going to eat your flesh. Well, that's how serious it is. Get rid of it, Yahshua said. Don't even let it enter your mind. Got 3 days till atonement. Atonement means unity. It means at one with Yahweh and His laws. Well, but the unbelieving, see, the unbelieving, they say, oh, well, maybe and maybe not. Well, that's where they're standing. And, of course, that's where they'll burn. And murderers, whoremongers, sorcerers, worshippers of gods, following the gods, liars, as Yahshua said, Satan was the inventor of these lies, will have their part in the lake that burns with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. Now, if you make it through and you're resurrected, but you still haven't joined the house, and you'll have 100 years to join them after we have lived 1,000 years, then you'll be resurrected, some to damnation, some to a chance to live. Well, that's when your uncles and all of them, your mothers, your daddies, it wasn't called, that's when you'll resurrect them at the end of that millennium, and that this second death here is speaking of that. The first one was before that. Now, here we see a lamb and his wife. A lamb and his wives, Yahweh Shammai. And there came one of the seven. This is the 7 works of Yahweh. The 7 lights of Yahweh is called. The 7 trees that bring forth Yahweh's laws and Yahweh's prophecies. Same one he set up with Abel, at Abel, called the Garden of Eden. And there came one of the 7, Malachim, who had 7 bowls full of the 7. This 7. We're the last of the 7. And the secrets of Yahweh is being revealed. Yahshua himself removing the seals, being high priest of the house of Yahweh. Understand that. There came one of the 7. Here's the warning that takes place before this. Then there came one of the 7, Malachim, who had the 7 bowls full of the 7 last plagues, and talked with me, saying, Come, I will show you the bride, the Lamb's wife. And he carried me away in the Spirit to a great and high mountain. High mountain. We saw the 12 tribes of Israel. Well, we saw Moshe first come out, and he came to this mountain. They're still hunting it, Sinai and Horeb. They're still hunting that mountain. They haven't found it yet. A couple of our crew did. Made a film of it. But, of course, this high mountain, it's the promotion of Yahweh, his work. If you'll get that in your mind, and then you'll understand the rest of it here. He showed me that great city, the holy Yahweh Shammai, and someone read this, and they said, well, the bride is nothing but a city, a gold city, a piece of gold. That's the bride of Yahshua. No, he forgot the high mountain here. The high mountain, that's you, brother. You are that mountain. He carried me away. Yahweh is building that mountain right now, as he's building it through Moshe to begin with. He carried me away in the Spirit to a great and high mountain, and showed me that great city, that holy Yahweh Shammai, descending, notice, descending all the way from heaven. That is high, isn't it? This great high mountain right here in this house is actually descending all the way into heaven and back and forth from Yahweh to here. That's Mount Sinai. Now, all the stupidity, you're still out there hunting it with picks and shovels, hoping to uncover something that Moshe left there. You'll never find it. It's here in the book of Yahweh. In the last days, I will establish this great and high mountain. And this time, it's going to reach all the way to all the planets everywhere. And it will take the place of the original sons of Hillel, who is still making a mess out of everything. even though they're changed somewhat, they're still making a mess out of everything. But Hillel still wants them in the rulership of the kingdom of heaven, and still pushing to get them there, and saying all the time, well, look at these people. All they're doing here, they just think this is they're going to get rich here in the house of Yahweh. I said, yeah, they are. They're the richest people on the face of the earth. Rich in knowledge and understanding. Well, this high mountain now, and he showed me this great city, the holy city, Yahweh Shammai, descending out of heaven from Yahweh. Descending. That don't mean now it's coming this way, a big silver city or a golden city coming this way. There's another one that shows that. Having glory of Yahweh. Having the glory of Yahweh. And notice, and her light. Her light. Her light. Do you see that? Look at the last word in that sentence there. Her light as clear as crystal. Could I make it any clearer than I have right now? Having the glory of Yahweh, we're the ones that's showing the difference. As Zechariah said, we're showing the difference in the ways of Yahweh and the ways of the world. Right now, the ones in rulership, Yada, the heads of Jacob, worshiping Yada on the 7 hills, Yes, he's still in control. His children are. And of course, his brothers are still praising him. And he's got his hand on the neck of every enemy. And this is what this man from Russia finally recognized. That they've got their hands on the neck of their enemies, and they're putting the pressure on them. Assad from Syria. He's recognizing what is taking place. He don't know why it's taking place, that the great plan of Yahweh that is taking place here, where Yahweh is allowing these people, the tribes of Jacob, that was shown in Genesis 49, 10 and 11, we'll get there in a minute, for the last days. They're ruling the earth. He has his hand on the neck of every enemy. And when he sees them step out of line, as Assad said, they start getting independent. That's when the pressure is starting to be put on them. Well, of course, they're getting tired of this pressure now, as is always the case. When they said to Samuel, we want kings. Well, he said, this is the way your kings are going to do you. But you want kings? Yahweh said, let you have kings. So Yahweh chose a king. Now, you got to remember this. Yahweh chose that king for a reason, because from him had to come forth the one who to pay for their sins that they were creating with this force. With lust and greed and the eating of unclean foods comes the wars and the fighting. It's a great mountain that Satan has created. And you can't be a part of that mountain. You've got to be a part of this mountain here that comes from Yahweh himself, from Yahweh Shammai, this great and high mountain. It's crystal clear if you just read and believe what is written here in the Holy Scripture. Well, Assad, he has recognized this, and he knows that every time a nation steps out of line, and this is what we're seeing in this time period right here. We're seeing nations step out of line, and they're trying to become independent, and he says, if he survives, which he won't, he says if he survives, he would encourage, this would be encouragement to the other nations who are being squeezed. Their necks are being squeezed. And they're being forced to pay their tribute to the Vatican, to Yada, to the Yadim. Well, it's clear as crystal. That's the message that's going out today, and it's going out to all the world. And as I showed you at the beginning here, they're listening. I never would have thought that they'd be interested in the tabernacles, the Feast of Tabernacles, but they are. Quite a few. It's coming up quite rapidly. This is this great high mountain that is reaching out to all the world. And had a great and high wall, and no one's going to get through these gates without it come through the house of Yahweh, through Yahshua the high priest. And that's what he says. He said, this gate, talking about in Mattithyah, the 7th chapter, straight is the way, narrow is the gate that leads to life eternal. Broad is the way that leads to this world. And many are going to follow that way. Well, Yahweh allowed this back in Samuel, 1 Samuel, when they wanted kings and rejected Yahweh's rulership. Shaul, the apostle Shaul, said that since they did not want to retain this great high mountain in their knowledge, Yahweh gave them over to the mountain of Satan and lies and foolishness, Halloweens and Christmas, Santa Clauses, popes, so forth. He gave them over to this. And there's been fighting and war. And under force, they forced them into following this beastly system. When they were in Israel, they were gathering up with their army. They were gathering up an army. Those who didn't want to join, they died. Those who would join, they sent them for training for the army. The apostle Shaul was one of them. He ravished those who came to the feast. He ravished those who used the name Yahweh. And at the end, in 70 AY, they destroyed Jerusalem, removed the temple, all the artifacts, all taken to Rome by General Titus. Now that's a pretty clear and crystal light, right? Anyone could see that, surely, by now. 12, let's read on. Had a great and high wall and had 12 gates, and remember this is to guard the way to life. Verse 13, on the east gate. Verse 14, the wall of the city was 12 foundations. Now we're putting this the gematria into the gematria now, and it's taken some time, and it will take some time, but I hope to have it by sometime during the feast. All of this right here. That I've been working on since 1982, by the way. That's a pretty long time. But now we're hoping to find some answers in another direction here. He who talked with me had a golden reed. Wow, did you get that? Did y'all get that? Golden reed? He who talked to me. This was one of the 7 talking to me. I'm talking to you. If you said that, I'd be talking to me, to you. Put yourself in the place of the person I'm talking to here. The one who talked to me was one, as you see, Yahweh, like it was in Daniel, where he showed Daniel someone who was talking to him, but he is preaching in a future generation, but he was talking to Daniel. Well, here's the same thing. And he who talked with me had a golden reed. A golden reed. Hold your place, hold your face, and don't turn. Take your other hand and turn back to Revelations 11. Revelations 11, and you'll see who was talking to me at that time. To Yochanan, who copied this. We, the House of Yahweh, have talked to many prophets, and we didn't even exist at that time, except in vision and inspiration. But Yahweh showed our work to many prophets, and you'll see this throughout the Scriptures. If you'll just start paying attention, you'll see it. Now remember, this person who talked to him had a golden reed. A golden reed, it's a pencil, but it's the ability to check out things. Check out things. Make measurements, measure the temple. What was to occur to the temple? Yahshua, he had those measurements of the temple. He said, don't even pay any attention. They're going to be destroyed. They're going to be taken away from here. Going to be removed. Okay, and here in Revelations 11 now, and there was given to me a reed. A reed. Did you hear that? Look back up to chapter 10 and verse 7. Who was it given to? But in the days of the voice of the 7th messenger. 7th messenger? 7th messenger. You see that? Go back. Hold your place there. Look back here to Revelations now, 21. Having the glory of Yahweh, and her light, clear as crystal. Her light. And there came to me one of the 7. He had this clear crystal, this mountain of knowledge. You know, we were described by one of our enemies who said, when they asked, Shaul asked him, what do you think of Yisrayl Hawkins? And he says, he's a mountain of information. And that was an enemy. Well, back to Revelations 10 now. In verse 7, but in the days of the voice of the seventh Moloch, when he will begin to sound, the great secrets of Yahweh would be finished, as he declared to his servants the prophets. As we, the house of Yahweh, declared to Yahweh's servants in a 6,000-year period, in vision, and in inspiration, words. Well, now I want to go on down to verse 11. And he said to me, you must prophesy again. We prophesied to the prophets now already. You must prophesy again before many peoples and nations and languages and kings. And there was given unto me this reed. That's the seventh Moloch, getting this reed. This reed like unto a measuring rod. And the Moloch stood, saying, rise, measure the temple of Yahweh and the altar and its confines. But the court which is outside the temple leave out, measure it not, for it is given unto the Gentiles. And the holy city they will tread underfoot 42 moons. 42 moons now. We've covered that. If you don't get it in the Mark of the Beast or Yisrayl Says program. Yisrayl Says program has it all. And I will give to my two witnesses to perform their prophetic office, and they will crystal clear, they'll make this mountain crystal clear, and they will foretell, making crystal clear, about the 1,260 days. These are the two olive trees, the two lampstands, ministering for the Father of the earth. Mark out that as it were. It's not there. Just erase it. They are the two olive trees. Now, back quickly to Revelations here. Revelations, we stopped at, I'll find it here, 15, verse 15, 21 verse 15. And he who talked with me had a golden reed. The golden reed is the two witnesses, and one of them is given this pen or golden reed to measure the city and the gates and its walls, that is, guarding it, telling you how to achieve salvation. We want to read one more verse here. And the city lies foursquare. Well, these are the measurements now that we're working on, and we'll hopefully have the information by the feast. I want you to go back to Genesis now. Genesis 49 again. Genesis 49. Now, don't forget all that information there. Keep it in your mind. This is what's taking place. Genesis 49 in verse 1, and get the words last days in that sentence. You see it? Last days. I'm showing you what is going to take place not right now. This man was dying. He says, come and I'll show you what the seventh messenger said to me. That's right. We were speaking to Jacob at that time. I know that's hard to swallow, but that's what took place. We were speaking to him and showing him, and he could actually see and hear us, as Daniel did. He heard the two witnesses, two houses of Yahweh, speaking. And it told him exactly what was going to take place. He told him in verse 10 and 11 there about Yahshua, the high priest, is going to take this scepter. In fact, he's already issued that scepter to us. Not over the whole world, but over the house of Yahweh. We'll see that in the future here, maybe during the feast sometime. But this scepter that he's talking about here, the high priest is giving it to you so you can learn how to use it right now and be tested to see if you will or not use it properly. Now, look back to keep that in mind. Go to Mattithyah 24. We'll end here very shortly. Mattithyah 24. In the last days, and Yahshua, verse 1, went out, and leaving the temple, when his disciples came to him to show him the temple building, bragging about how beautiful it was, I'm sure. But Yahshua said to him, "Do not see all these things. It's not in your future. Truly I say to you, there will not be left here one stone left upon another, which will not be thrown down." That is a little bit mistranslated. It's removed. The word is removed. And then he says, he went on then in verse 3, "Now as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came unto him, saying, Tell us, when will these things be? What will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age?" Or the King James Version says, "End of the world." He shows the great tribulation, 21-22. Verse 7, the nation against nation and the disease epidemics that are that you can't even count them anymore. So many, and they're multiplying so rapidly. If you don't have one, stay out of the world, or you could get one easily. The false prophets in verse 11, the bringing forth of iniquity and the love disappearing. If you noticed in King Husad's message, he says there's no use in trying to analyze any sense out of this. He said there's something behind this, a religion behind this thing that is pushing this whole thing forward. They care nothing about anyone. They're just out to do exactly what Satan tells them to do, as the Savior said in Yochanan 8:44. And then you see verse 14, yourselves, right there. You see yourselves in this verse 14, and the message being crystal clear, going out to all the earth. That's the house of Yahweh, right there. Revelations. And he says, if you go over to verse 29, he shows you the nuclear bombs here that will darken the sun, which science knows it's going to. They also know that it'll burn the earth in about 1 hour, from 30 minutes to an hour. The scientists say this is all it needs. It's going to be fast, as the Pentagon just announced to you. It's going to be very fast, and it's going to be very soon, too. In the same way, when you see, verse 33, in the same way, when you see all these things, we're seeing them right now. I don't see how they could be any clearer than they are now. They're crystal clear, what we're seeing, and they're the fulfillment of prophecy exactly. Truly I say, 34, truly I say to you, that generation of the nuclear bomb started in 1934. Knowledge increase started in 1934. Started with the computer, 1934. My birth, look up the birth, and 1934 was my birth. If you look up those numbers in Strong's, it'll point you back to when I was conceived in 1933, and exactly what I would be doing. That's the last light, or the seventh lamp. The seventh light that makes things crystal clear. And we are making them clear, brother. Now, I don't see how anyone could keep from understanding the prophecies once it's presented in this manner. It's just unbelievable how anyone could doubt these prophecies. They are being fulfilled one after another. And Yahweh says to you, fear not, But reverence the word of Yahweh, every word of it. It's all going to come to pass. The promises to you are extreme. There's so many promises, and I've been wanting to get onto that subject, but it is throughout the Holy Scriptures. Yahweh is looking at you right now. He knows what's going on in your mind and your heart, and He's got the tests are almost to an end. The power is coming with every word you hear. It's going into your mind, how to control yourself in the great Yahweh Shammai, the great kingdom of Yahweh. May Yahweh bless you, and I'll turn the services back to the next leader. I love you.